Hello and welcome to The Course. I'm your host today, Lee, and I'm speaking with Assistant Professor of Law Adam Davidson from the University of Chicago Law School. He researches and teaches primarily in the areas of criminal law and procedure, constitutional law, and the intersection of race and law. His current projects focus on how tools within these and other areas of the law can further debates about reforming or abolishing police, prisons, and the prison industrial complex. Professor Davidson is here to talk to us about his career path and how he became a University of Chicago professor. So, Adam, let's start off by you giving me just a general overview of your career, beginning in your undergrad years and then taking me up to today and your current role at the university.
Sure. So I went to undergrad at The Ohio State University. I was actually a theater major, so my focus was on performance, on acting and musical theater. And I thought at that time that's what I was gonna do professionally. At the same time, I also got a business minor, so I took some, sort of basic business management courses and econ courses alongside that. But the bulk of my undergrad was spent in acting classes and script analysis classes and theater history classes, and so you can imagine the gamut of what that looked like. So I graduated and thought about going that route for a bit, worked sort of some odd jobs for a little bit before almost randomly, I kind of discovered how much I might enjoy the law. It was an election year, and I realized I didn't know as much as I would like to know about how elections in the United States worked. And I knew that like the Harvard Law Review was a thing that existed in the world. And so I just Googled, Harvard Law Review election article. And as it turns out, there was some very interesting work being done at that time on partisan gerrymandering, how different political parties will try and draw districts to ensure that they win certain seats. And that just kind of caught my attention. And from then on, I did more research, did more prep, and decided to go to law school. And over the next couple years, while I was prepping and sort of finalizing that decision, I was a tutor and substitute teacher for public school system, mostly teaching, fifth and sixth grade English. So that's how I found my way to law school. I didn't come to law school thinking I was going to be an academic. Although very early on, mentor and now friend and colleague of mine heard this story and said, Adam, the only people who just go out of their way and read a bunch of law review articles for fun are law professors. So maybe you should think about that. Think about, pursuing that. At the time, I thought that I was either going to be maybe a prosecutor. This was the very sort of burgeoning stages of the progressive prosecutor movement, or a civil rights attorney. But as I made my way through law school, as I figured out what exactly it was that legal academics do, as well as how legal academics fit within the broader legal community, I realized that it really was sort of my dream job. And so throughout law school, especially in my second and third years, I really focused on finding ways to do original research, to write, to work closely with professors. And I really think it was that paid off, because it was a lot of those relationships and a lot of that sort of proving myself that set me up to go into academia relatively soon after I graduated from law school, in part because I had a bunch of professors who I'd worked with who, despite my own self-doubts, my original plan was to practice for longer than I did, who said, no, we think you can do it. You should go for it. And, maybe it doesn't work out immediately and you go for it later. That's your original plan, sure, but we think you can do it. And so, take your shot. And I did. And it honestly worked out better than I ever could have hoped.
I appreciate that. And so, Adam, can you tell me a little bit about what your particular research interests are and how you would explain them to someone who has no experience with the law whatsoever?
Sure. So I very broadly think about issues of race and the prison industrial complex. So prison and policing and the criminal law is one way to think of it. And I tend to think about these issues in terms of, we have a variety of problems when we think about, especially the intersection of race and policing or race and prisons in the United States. And criminal law, criminal procedure, constitutional law are not the only areas of law that exist. And they are not the only areas of law that have potential solutions to those problems. So, for example, I have taken to looking at how things have, how different problems have been solved in things like state and local government law to, and how those solutions might be turned toward problems in policing and problems in prisons. I have also taken an interest in qualified immunity, which is this idea that government officials, most famously or infamously police, shouldn't be held liable for a constitutional violation unless what they do violates what's called clearly established law. And what exactly clearly established law is complicated and a big debate. But the basic idea is that unless a court has said, here is what the law is in a sufficiently clear way, even if a police officer or some other government official does something that a court says violates the Constitution, that police officer, that official won't be held liable because the law wasn't sufficiently clear at the time they acted. And so one of the ways that my work looks at this is to expand beyond just that particular doctrine of qualified immunity, but to look at how qualified immunity intersects with how we think about the judiciary and how we think about what seems to be driving judges' decisions, whether it's their professional background or their personal background or their politics, or if it's a pure just desire to get the law right. There's still incentives and things operating on them, and how that interacts with broader constitutional law. And so my research tries to look at the structures that society and especially government builds, and the solutions to those structural problems that come from a variety of areas of the law. I don't know if that was sufficiently simple, but I tried my best.
I appreciate it. We're talking about complex things. But to rewind just a little bit, Adam, I know that you entered college thinking that you wanted to go into the world of theater. Is that something that you had wanted to pursue since you were a kid, or was there something else that you were interested in back then?
So as a little kid, I remember, I don't know if I wanted to be a lawyer or people just told me, oh, maybe you should think about being a lawyer, because I guess I liked to talk and I was good at the things that people think of lawyers being good at. But I really transitioned to the idea of being in theater in, I suppose, 8th and 9th grade. We had a music requirement, and so I joined the choir and loved it and made a bunch of friends. And so from there, I started pursuing theater and music more and more seriously. And so I went into undergrad being a decided performing arts major. I didn't know if there was something else I might also do, but I knew that that was going to be the main thing that I was pursuing.
And is there anything about your background in theater that you think has aided you in your career as a law professor?
I think there's a few things. I suppose the obvious one is it's just so much public speaking and sort of auditioning experience. And it maps surprisingly closely onto the experience of teaching a large class, especially in law school, where it's not a pure sort of lecture style. It's a much more interactive Socratic experience. whether you're teaching, a seminar of 10 or a doctrinal class of 70. So there's that. But even presenting research to colleagues and the question and answer sessions are all, I very much feel like I'm drawing on sort of my theatrical training. But I think maybe the biggest thing that I didn't quite realize until I was pretty deep into law school was how similar a lot of the background work is for law and theater, especially if you think of something like Shakespeare. So much of that is just textual analysis and really, really close reading of text. And that's a lot of what legal research is. It's finding the correct texts, it's figuring out how to interpret those texts, bringing a bunch of different tools to try and figure out the best meaning or the best meaning for your client of any particular text, usually whether it's a case or a statute or what have you. And those sort of analytical abilities that I developed originally in theater translated surprisingly well to the law.
So, Adam, I want to also ask you about the challenges that you encountered. I'm assuming you did encounter challenges when you decided to pursue academia and specifically being a law professor. Tell me about that and tell me about what helped you overcome some of those challenges.
Yeah. So I've been, looking back on it, I have been incredibly fortunate in that my career almost certainly could have gone any number of ways. And I had the right mentors to guide me as I found my way. I mean, I think the biggest challenge for me was probably the biggest challenge a lot of us have faced in the last, few years, which was the pandemic. So I was a law clerk for several federal judges, and it was right around the time when I was trying to figure out what I would do next that the pandemic happened. And being a law clerk is an incredibly collaborative experience because though you're doing a lot of research and writing on your own, ultimately everything that comes out of the chambers has the judge's name on it. It is their final decision, and so you're always working very closely with them. Obviously, the pandemic disrupted that in an incredible way. But I think one of the things that really happened was that in that disruption, I thought, oh, it's strange to say, but this will be great because, oh, well, now I have a bunch of time to focus on research. I'm not, no one was doing anything, particularly social. But I think the thing that I've realized is that so much of, at least for me, so much of what gives me my sort of academic drive and the creativity that's necessary to produce knowledge, I suppose, is that collaborative atmosphere, both as a law clerk, but also as an academic, especially as a junior academic. And it was very hard. So I was a fellow at University of Chicago Law School, and the thing that I love about this school, loved about it as a student, love it as a junior professor, loved it as a fellow, is that it is a deeply, deeply collaborative atmosphere. Everyone is reading everyone's work and providing deep, detailed comments. It is an environment maybe like no other in the academy. And obviously that was wildly disrupted by the pandemic. I spent my first year as a fellow basically locked in my apartment doing Zoom meetings. And though people tried and I tried to recreate that atmosphere, it's obviously just something that's much, much more difficult to do, if not basically impossible. And so that first year as a fellow and was very difficult for me, both personally and professionally. And I think the way that I came through it is what I just alluded to is that it wasn't perfect by any means. No one will say it was, but people really tried. people across the law school made really, really great efforts to try and recreate the culture that the pandemic necessarily disrupted, even when it was just in Zoom meetings or trying to go for walks outside to have conversations, still, engaging with each other's work as much as we possibly could, engaging with each other in trying to recreate the sort of natural, spontaneous conversations that happen, now when we're just happen running to each other getting coffee. And there was something about both, yes, the substance of that, but also the idea that everyone was trying to pull in the same direction. And everyone was putting in often a Herculean effort, even when, we all had personal problems and losses as a result of the pandemic as well, that helped to motivate and inspire me even in particularly dark times.
So, Adam, why did you want to become a professor? There are numerous things that you could do with your knowledge, with your JD degree. Why do this?
Yeah, so I think it's a few things. The first, which was underappreciated for me at the time, was how much fun it is to teach law students. Uh, so this is my first year teaching a substantive class of first year law students, and even just seeing how they think about the law and how they answer questions about the law and interact with it between the beginning of spring quarter and the end is just brings a snot on my face. The depth of their engagement, the thoughtfulness, and watching them grow into these people who are inevitably going to be very, very good and great lawyers and have a very real impact on the world is just an incredible experience to have. But the other reason that I was really drawn to the job is that it is one of the few, if not the only, areas of the legal profession where you get to just think about what you want to think about and say what you think is right. Just as I've done my research and here's the answer that I have. Basically, everywhere else, you are either, if you're in the judiciary, you are often bound by precedent. Or even if you're not officially bound, something called stare decisis says that you've got to follow the thing that someone decided before you. And so, unless you think that the answer you're about to reach is just very egregiously wrong, what you're supposed to do is say, I may think that the best answer is X, but the court before me said Y, and so we're going to go with Y. Obviously, when you're a lawyer and you have clients, you need to and you have to do what is best for your client, even if you might not think that's the best argument, even if you might not think that that's your preferred outcome as sort of a policy or individual matter. You are your client's agent, and that's just not the case as a professor. There's a level of freedom, of intellectual freedom, that I realized both in law school and sort of solidified after that I valued immensely, and the ability to really put my head down and do research on topics that are immensely complicated, often immensely controversial, and know that I can come out on the other side of that and say, here is what I think is right. Me, Adam Davidson, what I think is the right answer to this problem. And I'd love to keep learning. And, I'll realize that, oh, that answer I gave before changes when I learn this new thing, or it was incomplete in some way. And just that freedom is more valuable than I ever would have thought before I came to law school.
What is the most fulfilling part of the work that you do? And you could even tell me about a moment that you were deeply fulfilled if you want.
This is my uh, third year at the law school. I was what's called a Bigelow Fellow, and I taught legal research and writing for 2 years. And this is my first year as a tenure track professor. And so it's also the first year where students who I taught in their first year are now starting to graduate. And I think maybe the most fulfilling moments for me have been when, I always sort of thought of it as just sort of doing my job, having conversations with students, helping them figure out whether it's, their sort of professional aspirations or where they're trying to go or how to get there, or, working with them on some writing project, or just sort of interacting with them in class and helping sort of guide their thoughts and their discussions. And coming back and having conversations with them now, sometimes years later, and realizing that maybe that conversation like helped them out when they were really struggling in a tough moment in school, or that something as simple as how I tried to sort of support them and guide them in a conversation in class, uh, help them to help them to express an idea that they've been struggling with. Having those moments of recognizing that, uh, maybe I'm doing a little bit of good in my students' lives is just incredibly fulfilling in a way that I maybe never would have expected. I think similarly, the amazing thing about being a law professor, especially perhaps, is how deeply intertwined the legal academy often finds itself with the rest of the profession. In part because obviously we're teaching future lawyers who we are influencing and who we're helping to learn to think about the law in different ways, but also because the legal academy so often is also focused on problems that are arising in the legal community as a general matter. And so seeing both through my students and through my work how being a law professor can make the world a better place in even very small ways, it's just an incredibly fulfilling part of the job.
Thank you, Professor Adam Davidson, for your time today. And course takers, if you enjoyed listening to today's interview, please check out the other ones. Leave us a comment, subscribe, follow, and share this episode with your friends and family. You can find out more about the University of Chicago through uchicago.edu or the university's campus in Hong Kong through uchicago.hk. Stay tuned for more, and thanks for listening.